Welcome back. While the ongoing conflict is igniting fears that the war may spread beyond Chad's borders, Chad accuses the Sudan of backing the rebels, something that Khartoum denies. For their part, Chad backs rebels in Darfur fighting against the Sudanese government. Libya is also involved, having a long history of intervention in Chad. More recently, Tripoli hosted peace talks between the warring sides just last October in what was to signal the end of the conflict. Then there is France, the former colonial power, which has a long-standing military presence in Chad. For the time being, Paris, which is close to the government, remains on the sidelines. Yet whether this will continue is uncertain, as France has previously supplied and armed the Chadian military. Joining us again, our guests in London, Ahmed Molikini Hassan. He is representative of the Chadian rebel group, the Union for Democracy and Development in the UK. In Khartoum, political analyst Mohammed Mahjoub Haroun. And joining us in this part of the show from Paris, Patrice DeBy, former editor of Le Monde and a political analyst. Let me ask Mr. Patrice DeBy in Paris, where does France stand at this moment with regard to the situation in Chad?
Well, it's a very awkward situation for France, which has defense agreements with Chad, but which is not intervening in the present conflict. But France, at the same time, is very deeply involved in EUFOR, the European Union force, which is supposed to start protecting refugees from Darfur or along the border with Sudan. As you mentioned earlier, France has had long-time defense agreements with different Chadian leaders.
And also,
starting in the 60s with independence. And
Mr. Patrice, the French are very known for their willingness to maintain the historic ties with the former colonies. Now, what's quite amazing about the French position is it seems that the French are waiting for who will decide the future of N'Djamena, and then they will step up. Do you agree with that?
Not exactly. The French are, as I said, in an awkward situation. They, if they want EUFOR to set up along the border with Sudan, France has to remain neutral in the conflict. But if France wants to the DEBY regime to go on as long as possible, then they would have to intervene. So they are in an awkward situation. That's why the French government went to the UN and put up a resolution last night, which has to be rediscussed today, asking a legal cover possible intervention.
It seems that we're dealing with a very complex political reality now in Chad, with different major players. You have Chinese involved in the oil industry, you have the Sudanese, you have the Chadians, you have the Libyans, and then the French. Let me start by asking Mr. Mohammed Mahjoub in Khartoum, if the rebels succeed in toppling DEBY, will this provide the Sudanese with more leeway in the international community? Because they have a lot of problems with regard to Darfur, the south of Sudan, and different issues.
At present, it seems like the situation is not yet settled in Chad, and the chances seems to be 50-50 on both sides. But if in case the rebels succeed to take over in N'Djamena, I think that will certainly be something that might add to the side of Sudan. Sudan is certainly not happy with President DEBY. It seems like President DEBY has been lending some support to the rebels against Sudan.
Mohammed, that's the very vintage Sudanese position that we have been hearing so far from officials. Mr. Ahmed in London, you have been saying throughout these days that your concern is to fight against a corrupt regime, but all those who came before you in the past and took over N'Djamena said we would like to distribute wealth among the poor. They turned out to be a bunch of dictators. How can you convince the international community will be totally different, not interested in amassing wealth?
Yes, we stand for the interest of our citizen. That's what is not 1, 2, 3 people. It's almost entire population. They are sacrificing for life, and they want to take off this corrupted regime. Therefore, after that, it will be a transition government for a short time. Then after, the Chadian population going to choose through fair and free election, and that then it will come a good governance that everyone.
If France interferes, Mr. Ahmed,
profit from.
Very much interested in listening to what you would say about this. If the French decide to interfere militarily, what will be your position?
French will not be interfering in internal conflict in Chad. That's not what defense agreement with Chad.
Did you get any guarantees from the French that they will not interfere, that will let you finish your job?
Well, they didn't. They didn't, and I think their position now is not that bad. They did not interfere, and now we control entire territory of Chad. It's only a small part of the capital, which is presidential palace, is still DEBY is there. That's the only part is left.
Okay,
we left because of some reason.
Let me ask Mr. Patrice. Patrice, French are known to be very good readers of history, but sometimes they don't learn a lot from history. They've seen the Americans pull the carpet from under their feet. Now the Chinese are stepping up. Do you think that the French now are in a very embarrassing situation where if they lose more power in Africa, they would be seen as totally impotent?
Well, France is less interested with its strategic interest in Africa as it was before.
But there is
the
oil
situation now is that
there is the oil factor.
The situation is that the oil factor is definitely a factor in France's policy in the region, and probably also for Sudan. But the main problem for France, for the European Union and for the UN, is to try to use Chad as a springboard for supporting all the refugees that have been thrown out of their country by the Sudanese regime and its Janjaweed militias. And for that, the French have to deal with a very unsavory dictator, corrupt, there is no doubt about it, no better than the dictators that were in power before, and perhaps not better than those who will come later and who fought a time were members of the DEBY regime.
Mr. Mohammed, in Khartoum, the very idea of establishing a client government to provide Khartoum with more leeway to impose its will or have its own agenda in the region could be very attractive, but on the other hand, it has its own setbacks. We've seen people supported by Khartoum, but after years they were just saying to Khartoum, we no longer support you. So what will change this time?
I don't know whether I haven't got your point correctly, but well, before that, let me just make a brief comment on what the colleague from Paris has just said.
Yeah.
To me, it seems France has not chosen to take a neutral position on the crisis in Chad. It's correct that France has chosen not to intervene militarily in this conflict, but it has already decided to go diplomatic. I mean, France is active now, mobilizing the entire world against the rebels attempting to take power by force in N'Djamena. So there is a French position. That's a position that's
part of the diplomatic maneuvering, because on the other hand, we know that the Sudanese are using the Chinese to support them at the international community, especially at the United Nations. So what's wrong about that?
The Sudanese are
using the Chinese.
The Chinese,
exactly, to get more support.
I don't think that that's correct. I mean, it's correct that this Chadian issue is so complex. There are so many powers from within the region and from the international community that are party to this conflict. There are the French, the Chinese, the Americans, there are the Libyans and the Sudanese in the region. There are some regional organizations like
we don't
the
want to be
African
bogged
Union
down
also.
with the very details of the situation right now in Chad and who's who and the ramification of what could happen. But let me ask Mr. Ahmad in London, what will be the future of the region if you come to power?
The future of a region is Chad. Already we solved the problem. DEBY it doesn't have any power anymore, and we are preparing to bring peace, democracy, and good governance.
Okay,
that
Mr.
will be not only good for Chadian,
I got your
but
point.
it's also good for the border country.
Mr. Patrice, with or without DEBY, how do you see the future of the region?
Well, it's very difficult to see because DEBY seemed to be out a couple of days ago. Now he's back in the forefront again. And this has been, unfortunately, what has been happening for the last almost 50 years in Chad. A dictator comes and then goes and then tries to come back. But what is interesting to notice is that this present attack from the rebels backed by Sudan happened just the very same moment that the U4 was going to deploy along the border, and at the very moment when the African Union and the United Nations are trying to deploy troops in Darfur.
Sorry, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for your insights into the situation in Sudan and the most possible scenarios. Mr. Ahmad Mulekini, representative of the Union for Development and Democracy in London, Mr. Mohammed Mahjoub Haroun in Khartoum, political analyst, and Mr. Patrice Dibia, former editor of Le Monde and a political analyst. Thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.